Well, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining in. I can tell you from past experience that you are in for a treat tonight. Joy presents a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and she's very engaging. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She is married to her best friend Ken, who I see is on as well. There he is. She is the mom of two children, Tess, who went through the Norwalk public school system and graduated from Brian McMahon Center for Global Studies. And Mia, I believe, is also on. I think I saw her, who currently attends West Rocks Middle School. Joy is a classical pianist and instructor. And I have to tell you, I'm going to take a little aside here. Well, it seems like a long time ago, but it was probably an event at Mike Mushak's house that Joy sat down at the piano and played the most amazing songs. Whatever we asked her to play, she played by ear and knew the notes, and we were all singing and having a really, really great time. She is also a nutritional coach, a physical therapist, orthopedically certified in private practice, and of course, a dog lover. The family has a 10-year-old lab. She is a beach and indoor volleyball player and coach. Tess, who attends college in Maryland, is the captain of her volleyball team, and you will know why the mention of volleyball is important during Joy's talk. Without further ado, and because I know you want to listen to this amazing presentation, I am happy to present Joy, who will speak this evening about her grandmother, who endured a tumultuous boat ride from Hiroshima, Japan, to the United States as a picture bride. So Joy, I see you're ready for your piano. Let's go.
Thank you for that really kind introduction, and I'm so excited to share the story about my grandmother. In Japanese, the word is arigatai, which means eternal gratitude. So thank you, Mr. Mayor Milling. Thank you, Sherelle Harris. Thank you, friends of the library, for letting me tell you the story of one of my most favorite people, my grandmother. During this talk, I am getting accustomed to Zoom, but if it has glitches or anything like that, please maybe raise your hand and I'll be happy to repeat something. I would be happy to answer questions at the end of my presentation, because if I get on a roll and things like that, I'd like to continue. And lastly, if you'd like to put in the chat box or chat room any songs you recognize, if you want to put them in there, I'm happy to look at that. My IT department consists of my 7th grader and my college daughter, so they will see that, and it's that way we could have some sort of interaction. But I'm so grateful to be here today. So the story is about my grandmother, and that's that little cute little girl, if you can see that. And her name is Terumi Kato. And she was an adorable little girl. And I feel that sharing, our knowledge of our past and wise ancestors is a vital learning tool for all of us, especially now in this day and age. She also taught me a lot of resilience and gratitude. So if you could see her in that picture, she's got the wide eyes, and she was a trailblazer in so many ways. And I'd love to tell my story because she lived to be over 100 and healthy and independent till the end. My grandmother, Terumi, was born in Hiroshima, Japan on August 8, 1896. She was born to a very affluent family. She kind of resembled this. butlers, a wait staff. They had all the amenities of an affluent family. Her father was a politician, an elected official, and a very successful businessman. She was flanked by 3 brothers. Her mother was a housemaker and very well educated for her time. Terumi and her mother had a lot in common. They had the highest level of education for women at the time, which was 8th grade. She also was well cultured. She got to take tea ceremony. She got to play little sports similar to volleyball, like my children. She also played some racket sports, which was kind of like a racket and a bad thing. And if you can imagine doing this in a kimono, brothers, but she could compete because she was to grow up to be a lady, so she had to learn flower arrangement, which was ikebana. She also had to learn the cultural Japanese dance, and she also learned how to play the Japanese harp, which is called the koto. In Japan, the other thing she had in common was that she had 3 brothers. Like I said, flanked with 3 brothers. So was her mother. And her mother also had 3 brothers who were all doctors. Her mother's father was also a doctor. They went to what the equivalent of Ivy League colleges in Japan. And they led a happy, fulfilled life in a home that was 3 generations in their family and filled with beautiful heirlooms. And they lived a very nice life. They also loved to cook. They were foodies. If anybody who knows our family, we are all foodies here. And one of their favorite meals was making pot stickers or gyoza. And those of you who know me, I love making pot stickers or their little Asian ravioli. And the more the merrier to make them together. They loved ramen and pasta, just like many cultures. And they loved sashimi and sushi. So sashimi and sushi was very much a delectable thing in Hiroshima, Japan. And this looks yummy. This is our dinner tonight, part of it. And it was more of a premium price because that's the fillet of the toro or the bluefin or the yellowtail fish. And they enjoyed that. In other words, Terumi grew up in a wonderful home. She and her mother also did exercises called which is a form of Tai Chi, which involves physical exercise and energy work. And they would do it morning and evening. Her parents lived to be 80 and 100 years old, and longevity was on their side because I think they incorporated the mental and physical fortitude. The other thing the women in Terumi's family had in common, they were straight A students. And they enjoyed reading the paper along with the men in the family. And Terumi would make her father proud because she would read the entire newspaper to her dad, which requires the ability to recognize over 10,000 symbols, Japanese symbols. And any of you who take in Japanese, it's a little tricky. So there's hiragana, katakana, and kanji, 3 different alphabets. And she had mastered that and was very, very happy to do that task for her dad every day. The other thing that they enjoyed doing was playing sports together. And her mother would always say, Terumi, you're a girl. You're not supposed to run around like that. Don't get your kimono dirty. You know, kimono is the Japanese outfit that's basically a long dress and tied up with a pretty obi. So it's not really gym wear, but she wanted to keep up, and she did. Throughout her time when she was growing up, she was told by her parents that she would be matched by a professional matchmaker. So matchmakers were pretty much across the board. And just like in the movie Mulan, the matchmaker knew people, not only the family history for immediate family, like your mom and dad, but 15 generations of systemic disease-free people, longevity, multitude of children, fertility, no mental illness, longevity, fitness, good mental fortitude, great business mindset, and great education for the men. And frankly, Terumi was a great setup for a matchmaking professional because she came from an affluent family. She had the highest level of education, which was 8th grade. She had a cultured background. She knew flower arranging and loved music and instrumentation, and she was disease-free, meaning she didn't have any of the childhood diseases, no chickenpox, no mumps, no measles, and was healthy, did not get colds or fevers. I'm kind of a similar fortitude. I'm very fortunate. I've never had a childhood disease either. I hope I don't jinx that. And so this professional matchmaker is called a baishakunin. And a baishakunin is kind of like the town clerk. They are privy to all these private records of not only who married who and who's who, but what's your health like. So they really were trying to make sure they made a match made in heaven so that the class system would be comparable. But even though Terumi was matched with an amazing young man who was just about to graduate from an Ivy League medical school and become a doctor, and she was 5 years her senior, which is a perfect age span, they said, because even Japanese people say that men mature at a different rate than women, and I'll just leave it at that. And so men were always older than the women, okay? And my daughters are laughing. And even though she was matched with one of the top available bachelors in Hiroshima, parents even knew each other and strongly recommended the union. Oh, by the way, matchmakers also were used to match Terumi's brothers, her 3 brothers, to make sure that they were bonding with the right people. However, Terumi dreamed about her idol, and her idol was Mrs. K. Okami, who came from Japan and went to Pennsylvania, the Medical University of Pennsylvania, and graduated in 1886. And she became a doctor, studied in the Western way, because she was not allowed to become a doctor in Japan. She wanted to do that because she, like I said, Terumi was a straight A student. She was able to even tutor her brothers in math. She could read the newspaper, and she thought that she could do it, but was not allowed at that time because she was a woman. It's much like, you know, the idol we have right now in our household is Ms. Naomi Osaka. She has her mother is from Japan and her father is from Haiti, and she is a trailblazer. So again, Terry was not sold on this bachelor that had chosen to be her fiance. And she begged her parents, please don't make me marry him, because she had till 18 to decide. They were breaking her the news at 15 so she can get used to this and enjoy her 2 years of freedom, 2 to 3 years of freedom. But finally she says, no way. There's no way I want to do this. I want to further my education and my career. I want to be just like my successful brothers. It's just not done, her mother said kindly. I understand. An interesting thing, she says, we knew deep down we were going to give you the name Terumi, because Terumi could be a name for a girl or a boy. And Terumi, at this point, she wanted all the amenities and attributes that the men could do easily. Go to high school, go to college, have a career, be respected. So that didn't happen. However, she requested that she become a picture bride. And the same by Shakunin, the matchmaker, said, you want to be matched up with some stranger in America? And she says, yes. And they do the same process. Look back many generations to see if they could find someone to match her accordingly. And in America, the same lineage is followed with all these bachelors. So at that time, Terumi had sent a picture of herself. She sewed a dress that looked very westernized. She was taught how to make kimonos, but she thought she would look more attractive in a Western style dress. So she designed that diagonal pattern with the lace to make her look slimmer and taller. And she was 4'10" and 80 pounds soaking wet. And she wanted to impress possibly some handsome, brave Japanese man who immigrated to America, because she thought that would be the land of opportunity. And her idol, that woman, was able to go to med school in Pennsylvania. And that was her dream, to be able to do that. So, cross over the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, in the mysterious part of America, near San Francisco. Is Nobuichi Takatsugi. That's a lot of names. So Nobuichi is, of course, a single man. He immigrated to America at age 18. He's a handsome bachelor. He requested that he would like to find a wonderful woman to marry because of several things. In 1906, they passed the Alien Act, where immigrants from Japan could not marry, they could not interracially marry, and they were not allowed to marry in the United States. Citizens. Therefore,
I don't know.
to be able to have a picture bride, and was given this picture. Of course, he fell smitten immediately. So she looked at Nobuichi's spreadsheet, right? Because she's given his resume, and he was born on April 2nd, 1888 in Hiroshima. They speak the same dialect of Japanese. He is the youngest son of a doctor. They have 6 brothers and 1 sister. All of his brothers went to college. Although Nobuichi went to high school, he went to a technical high school, which taught him mechanical, fixing things, making things out of wood and metal, and he loved tinkering. So he decided to set sail as an 18-year-old and immigrated to San Francisco. He had secured a job with Driscoll Farms. Anybody heard of Driscoll Farms? They make,
Yes.
yeah, great. They produce most of the strawberries in California, and it was a big, fairly big operation then too. And you can buy Driscoll Farm strawberries at Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, ShopRite, Stop and Shop, all the major stores. And he became a foreman because he was trilingual. He spoke, of course, Japanese, which is Nihongo. He spoke Spanish, and he spoke English. He was very amiable and was able to really relate to different people. He even took various migrant workers of different ethnicities to the doctors or the hospital and would explain in English to the European American doctors what was the issue, because oftentimes they didn't speak English. He was just a very nice man. But however, as I said before, the 1906 Alien Act did not allow him to get married in the United States. Therefore, back to Japan, Terumi looked at Nobuichi's photo, which was about 12 years old, because back then they didn't have Polaroids and they didn't have, Shutterfly and inexpensive ways to take pictures. He ended up having to send an old photo of himself to his bride-to-be, and she thought, oh, he's pretty nice looking, very nice looking. And she said, okay, only if you meet my 5 requests. You can only imagine what her 5 requests were. She said she would come to America if she got to achieve her educational and career goals. She will never work on the farm because that would damage her hands, and her hands are her tools, especially if she was going to become a doctor. And Nobuichi would make his own lunch because she would be busy at school or starting her own career and wouldn't have time to go home to make him lunch. eventually in their marriage, they would buy their dream home and call it their own and have her parents and his parents visit from Japan. And number 5, no children for at least a decade so they could achieve the above goals, because she felt to be a good mother, she could not be dividing herself between career, education, and children. It wouldn't be fair to their children. So what do you think he said? He said, okay. And they agreed to it. So then, shockingly, Terumi's parents said, you don't want to go. You're making all these demands. We don't know if you're going to be happy. We heard that people aren't treated well in the United States because of how you look and the different language and the different food and the different customs. And she says, I don't want to live the life of you, Mom. I want to come to America and try what happens. And her mother cried. Her father even cried. And he said, just like in Alexander Hamilton, you'll be back, because you don't want to live on a farm. You don't want to be working hard. You don't want to be, slaving away. You have all this wonderful home. You have everything covered here, anything you need. And she said, no, thank you. So her parents paid for the $30 one-way ticket on a boat leaving Yokohama in Japan to America. And that was in San Francisco Harbor. That took 14 long weeks. So she packed what she could carry. So she packed things like her kimono, her sewing kit, her doll. She packed a diary, a ledger book, her favorite novels, and off she went. Her mother was heartbroken, her only daughter leaving the house, and so boldly. She also had in her hand her passport and her marriage certificate with her new last name, Takatsugi. She was kind of bummed about that because it was Kato and now it's Takatsugi, 3 times the number of letters. So Takatsugi, try to say that 6 times quickly. And so they're on the boat. She was very equipped to be on the boat because she didn't get sick, unlike the other 110 picture brides that were on the boat. And they got to be a little chummy. She didn't know any of them. They were from all parts of Japan. And they said, why would you leave your affluent home? We're leaving because we're, the daughters of farmers, and we just need to find a better life. So we are leaving for America. And Terumi says, I'm going to go for education and I'm going to start working and start my own career. So in 14 weeks, if you can imagine, on a rocky boat that was not a Norwegian cruise liner, it was a freight boat, and there was 4 girls squished in one room. It was not a pleasant ride. So she had a lot of time to daydream. They were wearing all kimono and they had to sit together. Her dreamy time. So somewhere out there was her dream. She was so excited to go to America, the land of opportunity, the land that was so mystifying to her. And she was brave. And at 19, fearless. When she finally landed in the San Francisco harbor, there were many people, like I said, 110 husbands looking for their wives. And everybody had their certificates, marriage certificates, and their passport ready. They passed through the inspection, and if they showed any signs of fever or malaise, some were deported back to Japan to take that same 14-week ride back, unfortunately, if they were deemed unhealthy. And she passed, entered through the port, and Nobuichi was smitten the minute he saw her. And when he saw her, he thought this. you are my sunshine. He was so happy that she said yes to him. And he arrived at the harbor with another couple, a married couple, who were his good friends, and she thought they were really old. They were 32 years old. So to a 19-year-old, a 30-year-old looks old. And then to her, she saw her husband-to-be, Nobuichi, a wide smile and very weathered face from being in the strawberry fields 24/7. And she thought he would look younger. But like I said before, his picture was 12 years old. So now this man is 28. 28 to a 19-year-old. Looks a little challenging. So when she saw him, this is what she thought. So hi ho, to work we go. She was ready to start school. She was ready to change everything. And she was thinking he was really small. He's 5'1" at most and about 100 pounds. And she thought he looked taller and more handsome in her little photo that she had of him. I wish I had those photos to share with you, but I don't. And I'll explain to you why later. So as you could say, there were different impressions. And then that night, Terumi stayed with this married couple. And the married couple served them a very nice dinner together. And they explained to her that Nobuichi was a very good man. He is the foreman that employed her husband. He's also very kind, sense of humor, very generous, and they would have a happy life together. And they'll drop her off tomorrow at his house. So Terumi said, okay, fine. How would you deal with that? So the next morning, this lovely couple took Terumi to Nobuichi's house. And it was a humble bachelor pad, to put it kindly. It was tenement farm housing, which are somewhat like apartments built on a farm. So it was a 1-bedroom little apartment, kind of like a dorm room, with its own little shower and a toilet. It wasn't like her beautiful 5-bedroom home that she was used to in Hiroshima, Japan. It had no heirlooms. It didn't even have a bookshelf. It had no amenities. And he said, welcome to my home. And like a bachelor, he thought it was just fine. Little did he know, she was going to change things. The floor squeaked, and it felt very primitive. So she went straight to work, told him that we had to make bookshelves. We had to organize her books, her ledger book, her diary. She had great energy, even though they came back. She just had come back from a 14-week boat journey. She remembered Terry helped even her father, who was a politician, write his speeches. She could read the newspaper. She would often help her brothers in homework. So she's used to being in charge. Did I mention I also have 3 brothers? Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. When she got to the farm, he showed her around. They had their own chickens. They had fresh eggs. He also had his own little small strawberry patch. They grew cantaloupes, cabbage, okra, spinach, lettuce, carrots, daikon, which is a big horseradish. They were fairly independent. He was living in Watsonville, California, which is about 90 miles from San Francisco. So it's a kind of a coastal town with beautiful weather most of the time, in about the mid-70s and 80s, kind of like today's weather. It's just beautiful. And the growing season is year-round for various crops. But the growing season, as you know, for strawberries in Northern California is usually between about March through about June to July. And that's their busy season. They never have snow like Terumi was used to in Hiroshima. And she got used to her nicer weather. And she still was wearing her kimonos because she's not going to work on the farm. So Terumi started working on memorable meals. She started seeing how expensive things were. If you were to go to buy sashimi like this, it was quite expensive. It's kind of like the filet mignon of a fish. And when she would buy things from the fishmonger, she said, you know, what else can I buy? And they said, well, we have the scraps of the sashimi or the raw fish. Do you want those? They're not the nice steak size. And she said, yes. And she started making chirashi sushi. And it looks like this. And chirashi sushi is like a 7-layer dip of sushi. Yes, this is our dinner tonight. And it has eggs. You could have lemon on the side. You have the raw bluefin tuna on top, chopped in little tiny pieces, because that's all the way they come. There could be cooked carrots in there, celery, and also avocado. It's basically like a poke bowl, right? And who doesn't like a poke bowl? And those are very popular now, but that was very popular in their house. And Nobuichi thought, this is great. She can cook. She's direct. She's very direct. I'm just so lucky. And he would thank her every day. I'm so grateful you're here. Arigatai, right? I'm eternally grateful. Yes, words to live by for all of us. I'm getting hungry thinking about poke bowl. She also started cooking other things. One of the most popular things at the time was spaghetti and Italian food. And pizza was just coming into vogue at that time, about 1915, 1916. Jello, roasted ham. And then people were boiling salmon. She thought, why would you boil something that if it's that fresh, you eat it raw? And she thought these different customs. So she started making things like that to become more Americanized. She would make pizza. She would make spaghetti. She learned some people made things like arepas, and she thought those are delicious, and empanadas. And she would serve it to Nobuichi, and he would always pour soy sauce on everything. Soy sauce on the spaghetti, soy sauce on the arepa, soy sauce on the taco. And she said, aren't you gonna taste your food first before you put that on there? Now, does that sound familiar? Anyway, we're more alike than different. So as I said, Terumi is an excellent kimono seamstress. So she decides that she's going to show her wares and go door to door at the European American neighborhoods that look very, very nice. And she would show the kimonos and said, I could make you one custom for you. And she'd show these beautiful kimonos that probably in today's market would be tens of thousands of dollars. Hand painted, brocade, beautiful. And she was willing to make them for this taller population. Nobody's interested. Even the Japanese immigrant women and men cannot wear that kind of impractical clothing. Most of the women there were working on the farm with their husbands, but she had him sign the prenuptial saying, I am not working on the farm. That's not for me. Smart lady, or in Japanese, smarto lady. And in Japanese, it's very difficult to say else, so smarto lady. So she decided, and she went door to door, and everyone says, I don't want a kimono, thank you. She thought, they don't want anything that I sew yet. I have to think about what they want. They said no right now, but I'll think of something they like. So she enrolled in Los Angeles's garment district in a 6-month program to work at a factory. This factory was basically a sweatshop of immigrant women of all different nationalities learning how to make American textiles. They learned how to make women's clothing that sold at Sears and Roebuck. They learned to make men's jackets. They learned to monogram on handkerchiefs with the sewing machine. And that's how Terumi learned her alphabet. And she was so eager to learn the English language and the American ways, because kimonos and the things that she was used to were not marketable where she was from in Watsonville, California. So she returned to Watsonville and again went to those same doors, knocked on them, and showed them her wares and said, that dress you have on from Sears and Roebuck, I can make it for you for half the price and it'll fit you better. She was not subtle and said, I will make that fit you better. It doesn't fit you. See that right there? The darts and the hemline, it's just not good. I can make it better for you. And it'll be half price. And sometimes the customers could easily afford it or they would want to barter. And she would ask them, what's your profession? And some of the housewives would say, well, I used to be a teacher. And she goes, you teach me English? I make you dress. And she did, and became friends and learned American ways. She wanted to do something helpful and with a profession, and she wanted to go to college, but it was impossible for her to go to college at this point because she hadn't gone to high school in America or grade school. So in 1916, just 9 months after she's arrived, she has a thriving seamstress business. She is going door to door. People are referring her, saying that she'll sew for next to nothing, anything, and better than the Sears Roebuck catalog. And beautiful material, and she will even press it for you so it looks nice if you need to go to a party. She was willing to do anything to show that she was excellent in her trade. She proved that no didn't mean anything until they said, but yet. During her off season, or during her husband's off season from the strawberry fields, they sometimes were laid off for a little bit because there's strawberry season, there's lettuce season, and there's a gap where they don't need workers. And obviously if you don't work, you don't get paid because it's piecemeal work. So she said, Nobuichi, you're gonna open a bicycle repair shop, because they wouldn't allow people from Japan in America to sell bikes because they couldn't buy the bikes because they were considered aliens. So they said they'll do a bicycle repair shop. So she set him up, made a nice sign, made it like a noren, which is a cloth sign saying, welcome, fix bikes. And people came because he had the lowest price. And as I said before, my grandfather, Nobuichi, was very generous and not a great bookkeeper. So he'd say, oh, pay what you want. And most people would say, okay, very next to nothing then. So he would spend hours, fix the bike, tune it up, and would not get paid well. So during that time, this song was really popular. And Terumi knew that. Therefore, she said, we're going to jump on that popularity of the bicycle. Girls, boys, women, and men were riding bicycles because it was before the era of the car or the affordable car. Even Henry Ford made bicycles at that time as one of their major market. So Terumi says, well, you're a terrible businessman. So I'm going to go there and I will collect the fees at your bike shop, but I'm going to move my seamstress business into there. Won't be out of the house anymore. I'll stay right in the front, and they can't take their bikes until they pay you a fair wage for what you did, and it's only fair. And so she would be up there and she goes, you could have your bike, but this is how much it's going to cost. He spent this much time fixing your bike, and this is what's going to cost. And nobody crossed this 4'10", 80-pound woman, and because she said it gracefully and politely. And then she also said, I would also like to recommend that if a man came in, your wife would probably need bloomers to ride her bike because it's very difficult with dresses and they get caught up in the spokes of the bike. Her new market, bloomers for these women. And she had a whole line of them. So they were elasticized at the ankle so they didn't get caught in the spokes. She had quite a booming business. She quickly overtook the salary level that he was making as a foreman for Driscoll Farms. So the good life was coming together for them. They had a thriving business for about 10 years, and they were really enjoying that. They hopefully had enough money to buy a house if somehow they could buy a house. They were still considered aliens after all this time. So 14 years after they got married, their daughter, Shoko, was born. They were overjoyed. They were so happy. They named her Shoko because that means saintly child. And they were blessed parents to have this beautiful girl. When they had the child, their fellow Japanese American friends and neighbors said, well, you waited long enough. She was 32 years old, which is kind of older during that time frame. Most of her friends, in fact, all of her friends, had children almost immediately within a year or two after they were here as picture brides, and they were tied to the house. But again, that was not her prenuptial plan, and it worked. So in the same year of 1929, Terumi's mother gets very ill in Hiroshima, and being the only daughter, she felt compelled to go see her mother and help her. So her daughter Shoko is 8 months old, and they buy a one-way ticket, children rode free at that time, to go back to Japan, back to Hiroshima. And it was $100 now, and it took 6 weeks. And can you imagine taking an 8-month-old child on a boat ride, which is a freight boat? Again, it's not Norwegian Cruises. I'm not advocating or advertising for any line, but it was not a cruise liner. And after 5,100 miles, they arrived in Yokohama Harbor. They were greeted with open arms. And since it was 14 years, her father said, see, I told you, you'll be back. And she said, only to take care of my mother, and then we'll go back to America. And she described what they did. She described the business they were doing. They left in 1929, and the business was doing fairly well. She left the bicycle shop for her husband. She left plenty of bloomers for him to sell. He probably gave them away the way he is, but he was supposed to sell them, and kept, hopefully he kept up the books as well as she did. So while they were in Japan and Hiroshima, the mother eventually got a little bit better. It took her a while. I'm not sure what illness she had, but it was a chronic illness that she was completely resolved in about a couple years. Much like her grandmother and her great-grandmother and Terumi, they were grooming Shoko, her little 8-month-old, just like her. They exposed her to music, and she loves music just like Terumi. They were grooming her to read and write in Japanese. They were showing her how to play the koto, which is the Japanese harp. They taught her ikebana. They took her to concerts so she'd understand music. They loved classical music. At this time in 1929, 1930, Japan's economy is thriving despite the world, the Great Depression that was going on throughout the world. So with that, when she went to Japan, she also took some of her life savings and took it to Japan, and her father and her brother, who ended up becoming somewhat like an investment banker, invested her funds while she was there. Terumi and her daughter Shoko, my mom, stayed in Japan for 6 years. They didn't anticipate staying that long, but she wanted her daughter to be cultured and thought that if she had her language skills reinforced until she was 6, she would not only retain them, but she would also have fond memories of playing with their cousins, playing with their grandparents while they were still relatively young, and just have a bond with Japan that otherwise she wouldn't, because the rest of her school year she'll be in school. And of course Terumi said, and my daughter, our daughter, will go to college. She will definitely go to college, and she will become a professional. And we cannot stay here in Japan for that reason. Again, her mother is heartbroken. Her father is heartbroken. Her brothers are sad. She gets on the boat and is on her journey back to America. So back across the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, back in Watsonville, California, is the Great Depression. The Great Depression. And Nobuichi is trying to deal with everything as well as he can. It was a global depression that happened from 1929 to 1939. Basically, the economy tanked. And for some of the children who are listening on, that means that it's a really tough time for everybody. The unemployment rate was at 25%. The crop prices dropped 60%. The international trade dropped 50%. And because Japan was still insular, they weren't quite affected as much. The United States suffered a great deal. They have pictures of Hooversville, people living in shanties. It was very sad, especially with starving children. I just read recently, actually yesterday, in the New York Times, they said there's an increase of 70% of the New York City students that are homeless now. And so it does break my heart to see history repeat itself. To give you an idea of the cost of these items during the Depression, the grocery costs, bananas were 19 cents for 4 pounds. Bread was 8 cents a loaf. Clifton toilet tissue paper was 9 cents for 2 rolls, single ply. Ketchup was 9 cents. A new car was $500. A gallon of gas was 12 cents. A new house was $3,500, a new house. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 was finally set so that the minimum wage could be 25 cents. Many people made much less than that, and a 44-hour max work week. So that meant the average American was making between $1,500 to $2,000 a year, meaning that they're barely squeaking by. Migrant farmers like my grandpa, Nobuichi, even though he's a foreman, he was making upwards of 35 cents to 50 cents an hour. In 1933, he was making 14 cents an hour and working well over 10 to 12 hours a day because he's a foreman. Fortunately, Terumi saved that money and invested it in Japan, brought it back in a secret place, and tucked it away in a safe holding place. Finally, after 6 weeks, Terumi and Shoko returned. This is how Nobuichi felt. This is how Terumi felt when she saw the status of the house had declined, or I should say decayed, and the economy. She was bummed out coming back to see the status of what the farm had turned into, his salary, the bike repair shop, because Nobuichi felt sad for all the people who were unemployed. He would just about give away his services. All the bloomers were gone because he kind of gave them away because he felt bad for people who couldn't afford cars. It was pretty tough. You know, the diligence and the discipline of Terumi wasn't there to run the business during this very difficult time. And we could understand Grandpa's empathy, or Nobuichi's empathy. Well, despite the political climate, Nobuichi still had a sense of humor. He still had migrant farmers that worked for him from Eastern European countries, from various Asian countries, from South America. He still spoke Spanish, Japanese, and English. Oftentimes his English was called Jinglish, right? Where it sounds like Japanese and English and kind of mushed together, kind of like chirashi sushi, it's all kind of mixed together. And he would say things like, he goes, I have a joke for you. I have a joke for you. You know, has a joke for you, right? And he's talking to a mixed group of diverse workers because they're not quite getting along or not working as fast. And so he's saying during the break, I have very funny joke for you. Hosu walks into bar. So as I said before, L's are very difficult. And Japanese Jinglish, you end every word with a vowel, whether it has one or not in English. So hosu walks into bar. A horse walks into a bar, my grandpa would say. And what did bartender say? No, bartender. What did the bartender say? The bartender said, why the wrong face? Why the wrong face? And he's cracking up. He's just laughing because no one knows what he's talking about. Why the wrong face? Why the wrong face? Is that the punchline? He goes, no, wrong face. Wrong face. You know, wrong face. Funny joke. And then everybody's cracking up. He's cracking up because he's laughing at himself because he can't say the L. It's like a disability. And so Everybody's happy. And, you know, I'm sure they were happy that they didn't name my mother. They named her Shioko instead of Lillian, because it would sound like this. Lillian, you want a lollipop? So it wouldn't never work out. I know, it's terrible to say these things, but I love my grandparents, but they kind of toku funny. Anyway, Nobu delighted that they were home. And they came home in July in time for Shoko's 6th birthday. So happy that she's home, that he surprised her with a puppy. She was so excited. And Terumi just saw a shedding dust collector that's going to make a mess of her already messy house. And she said, why didn't you ask me, Nobuichi, before getting our daughter a puppy? And he said, oh, well, in Japanese, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission from you. And he was right. Eventually, everybody loved that puppy, and it took the stress off of the whole situation of depression, because the puppy just loved them. Thank goodness they were fairly independent because of how they had the chickens, they had the eggs, they had their produce, they had each other, they had a lot of love, and now they had a puppy. And the puppy loved to eat sashimi and poke bowl. But then everything changed. On December 7th in 1941, the country of Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And when they attacked that naval site, a war began. The War Relocation Authorities, those officials came at 4 in the morning and took away Nobuichi, my grandpa, with no reason, just said, we have some questions to ask you. Didn't say how long, and it took him so abruptly at 4 in the morning that he couldn't even grab his glasses, and he left in his pajamas. Over 1,300 community leaders were taken. They didn't tell Terumi where he's going or what he did or what they were suspicious of. They just took him. Evidently, he was taken to a federal prison for interrogation. At that time, the media and the administration portrayed people that immigrated from Japan, or even 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generation Japanese Americans born here, as the enemy. If that didn't make matters worse, Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed an executive order on February 19th, 1942, Executive Order 9066, stating that all people, even if you only have 1/8 Japanese ancestry, and those are the babies, the orphans in the Catholic orphanages who have 1/8 Japanese ancestry, and they're born here, by the way, are to be detained in a relocation camp, or called an internment camp, to make it sound nicer. All 120,000 of you will go to these camps. The camp was administered, ironically, by the National Service of the Department of Justice. This was 78 years ago. It wasn't the Renaissance period or the Stone Ages, 78 years ago. Terumi was alone. She only had 2 days to move or sell everything. They said, you will leave everything behind. You can only bring what you can carry. And it's very strict as to what you can take. She didn't know where her husband was. She didn't know what she was going to do with items. The bike shop, all her sewing items that she still had to give for other people. She was in a quandary what to do. Can you imagine missing your husband, the safety of your child? Where are they taking you, and why? But all this time, Terumi did not cry. She did not fret. She made a list and looked at her ledger as to what was the most important things that she used every day, and packed her bag, packed her husband's bag, and packed their daughter Shoko's bag. Also at this time, Terumi is expecting not just one baby, but two. But she wanted to continue to stay strong for her daughter. And at the time, she didn't know she was expecting, and she wasn't feeling well because it was her first trimester. So he's been gone for 2 days. They have no idea where Nobuichi is. All she's given is a list of forbidden items to take in your bags. No scissors, no sharp items, no needles, no guns, no knives, no Boy Scout knives, no transistor radios, no cameras. Can you imagine a Japanese American person without a camera? I will just safely say that's just terrible. It's like taking away your toothbrush. So you could not bring those. So they were suspecting espionage, evidently. And you take what you can carry in an army convoy. Everybody was given one of these. Everybody was given one of these. Oh, and no pets. No pets. I will talk about the poor little puppy later. So this is basically what it looked like. Everyone had one of these, had your family name on it, not your first name, but just your last name, where you're supposed to meet at the street. This doesn't say why you're going, how long you're going, what kind of climate where you're going to go to, just what you cannot pack. Therefore, because you couldn't carry those things, you also could not bring, if it's modern day, no cell phone, no LED lights, no inflated soccer ball, volleyball, basketball, baseball, no lacrosse sticks, no puffy and face, no LL Bean boots, secondary ones, nothing fancy. And you don't know if you're going to the same climate, which is very fair climate in Watsonville, California, or where you're going to go. California is very vast. When they were evacuated, they were put in an army convoy, which is an army truck. They thought they were going to go in a school bus, like their schooling bus, but there was no air conditioning, there was no amenities, and the sides were boarded up and the backside was boarded up, so they couldn't see out where they're going. Then they went to the train station and they were put in trains, and the trains were boarded up the same, and they were not to look outside where they were going or the destination. 12 hours later, they were going to end up at their destination. They had no idea where they were. They had crossed state lines, and they ended up in a place called Poston, Arizona. This picture depicts that they were lined up. Luckily, they didn't look through every single bag because there were so many bags. Terumi had the good sense of packing her little stash of cash. Actually, it was a sizable stash of cash, and her sewing machine. She just hid it in there. It was very heavy. But the rest she basically left behind. People wanted to lowball her on everything, and it was pennies on the dollar. It was a very difficult time. That's why I have very few things from my grandmother and grandfather. I'm very sad I don't have any of the heirlooms they brought when they immigrated here from Japan. Many things are just memories mentally. So they landed in Poston, Arizona. It was named Poston after they got there because there was no name of this place. It was full of abandoned horse stalls, full of horse manure, dirty, and there were cots that had no mattresses. Very dirty. Some had cots, some didn't. There were showers, but there were no stalls. They were open showers to the outside and no privacy. There were about 11,000 people in this camp. 11,000 people. This is the size of the Norwalk public school system enrollment. You know, that's everybody from Brian McMahon High School, CGS, Norwalk High School, Ponus, West Rocks Middle School, Nathan Hale, Columbus side by side, Roten, all those schools and the elementary schools combined, living in horse stalls that fit on 2 football fields, surrounded by barbed wire fence. And all these people came, and on this tag was your barrack. How would you feel? There were guard towers with soldiers on the very top, 50-foot guard towers with ammunition. Those were the war relocation authorities, the officials that managed these places. They would even point the guns at children when they were trying to play marbles. There was no privacy. The people of Japanese descent tried to show that they were loyal. And this is where the camps were. The camps were even in Rower, Wyoming. They were in various states. There were anywhere between 9,000 to 12,000 to 17,000 people of Japanese descent. Most of them were Americans born here. So welcome to prison camp. It was very difficult. The size of Terumi's camp was the size of New Canaan. I wonder how it would look to have New Canaan surrounded by barbed wire. The food that was served to over 20,000 people were prepared by the people interned there, the Americans of Japanese descent. There were no cafeteria people like at school. And Shoko, who was then 11 years old, thought, this is so cool. At first, before she saw it, we're going to camp. Only rich kids go to camp. When she saw it was a prison camp, she was dismayed. And on top of that, her daddy was still missing. They had no idea where he was. And as I mentioned before, over 1,300 men who were community leaders, foremen, doctors, dentists, businessmen, attorneys, were all taken to various federal prisons and interrogated. There were no convictions whatsoever throughout the war. If you thought about the food that they had at the camps, I have no pictures of the food, but the meat of choice was usually Spam. And for some people, they really like Spam. I am not a fan. And fresh meat was never available. They never had sashimi or fresh fish. Fresh fruits and vegetables were very hard to come by as well. It was a lot of potatoes with mystery gravy on the Spam every day, morning, noon, and night. And they had to walk the length of a football field to go to the canteen to pick up their food, and they sat on benches. There was no poke bowl. There was no mushroom risotto. There was no pierogi. There was no adobo, no tamales, no chirashi sushi, no arepas, no chocolate chip cookies, no hamburgers and fries, no birthday cake, no Abel skewers, no Christmas cookies, no peanut butter blossoms, no spaghetti and meatballs, no pizza. It was a prison camp. The education was just as abysmal. There was one teacher for about 8,000 students, and they did not have a classroom. They had a barrack, and the barrack was a dirt floor, no chalkboard, no books, no paper, no pen. Again, they were only allowed to bring what they could carry. They had no idea the schools would not be equipped. It was a very sad time for these children, many of which were going to college, were going to high school, were going to graduate from high school and go to Ivy League colleges, and were plucked out of their dream and put in these camps. And you can see where Poston, Arizona is. It's in the middle of a very hot desert. Medical care was also abysmal. If there was a doctor that was of Japanese American descent, they were paid $19 a month to manage anybody who got sick there with no medical supplies or something that appeared somewhat like a hospital. Because these camps were in the middle of nowhere, where they didn't even have a name for these camps because there was no town surrounding this desolate desert. They didn't have access to hospital care. Babies were born, people died right in the camp. This deeply impacted Shoko and her mother, Terumi. They both suffered from asthma and eczema because of the winds in the desert, and the horse stalls always had wind and salt coming through because there were slats in the woods. It was in the roof. Everything came in that was sandy, and the winds were vicious in the summer, and the cold winds were vicious in the winter. And then to make matters worse, because of the lack of medical care, it also affected Terumi in that she gave birth to full-term twin baby boys who died during labor. And she tried to remain strong for her daughter Shoko, who again, I said was about 11. And still, Nobuichi is still not to be found. She continued to be stalwart. If you heard of Tiger Moms and happened to be Asian, well, this was the Tiger Mom of Tiger Moms. Despite all this that happened, she still said, no matter how the schooling is going in the camp, even if it's abysmal, you still are going to have Japanese writing and reading lessons. And this is at a time when they were trying to look less Japanese and assimilate in American tradition. And she said, we're in a prison camp. I'm going to continue to teach my daughter Japanese. So she taught her Japanese reading and writing. She said she must remain bilingual. And when we go visit grandma and grandpa and all the cousins that they had bonded with those first 6 years of her life, of her daughter's life, that we want to go back and visit them. So she will still remain bilingual and know Japanese. The definition of this in the dictionary, the government named these internment camps. And by definition, internment camps are short-term camps administered by the Immigration and Naturalization Committee and is a service of the Department of Justice. A concentration camp is a prisoner of war, enemy, alien depot. They put political prisoners confined indefinitely without evidence required. You make your decision. Nobuichi finally returned. He had lost 30 pounds. He was quiet, and he had been detained in a federal prison. None, again, as I mentioned, of the 1,300 clergy, nurses, doctors, teachers, community leaders were convicted, but they were still placed in the prison and interrogated for espionage. I feel that they were just breaking up the family unity, and none of them were ever convicted of any civil disobedience. What I did not mention in my talk that I gave back in February, because I had so many children attending, was the unfortunate passing of many innocent victims in various camps. And when Terumi and Nobuichi heard about terrible things, the camps were not allowed to really talk with each other, but somehow word got out as to what happened. And in Manzanar, there were 2,000 high school and college students. And these are students who are studying law at Berkeley or medicine at UCLA. And they were plucked out of college and sent in these camps. They had a sit-down quiet protest and said, this is unfair. We just want to go to college. Can we go back to school? And the War Relocation Authority opened fire, killing 2 in the back. They were, of course, unarmed. They had no cameras. They had no armament. And 11 others were shot. And about 25 were injured in that whole melee. Never was there a conviction. And they said it was because of mass hysteria, and let go at that. But each of the families have a story of losing their loved ones, and that there was no immediate medical attention given to these poor young boys. So they didn't have the advantage of what we have now is the virtual education that many of our children are having. They were just plucked out of college. And the other thing that happened is a Calabash cousin of Terumi, her cousin's son, Steve, was called to duty. And the government said any Japanese American male between the ages of 18 and 25 must be drafted or be deported back to Japan alone without your family. Steve is a third-generation American. He doesn't even know how to speak Japanese. So he, of course, enlisted. A draft is when the government forces an adult to go fight for their country and to become a soldier. There is no choice. But it was very admirable that he wanted to serve his country. He's 18 years old, and he wanted to prove that he could serve his country. So he was put on the war front in Italy. After 2 years, he came back injured. He received a congressional medal, and he was left to heal at the prison camp back in Poston with his family. Thank you for your service. Unfortunately, this was the case for all our servicemen who fought valiantly. He served in the 442nd, which is still the most decorated American battalion to date. They were put on the front line. To give you an idea, the 442nd received 4,000 Purple Hearts, 15 Soldiers Medals, 22 Legion of Merit Medals, 7 Residential Unit Citations, 21 Medals of Honor, 29 Distinguished Service Crosses, 4,000 Bronze Stars. Despite the sad loneliness of never leaving this prison camp, Terumi did have some hope. And she encouraged Nobuichi, who still was very quiet. Still very quiet. He wasn't tinkering. She even brought some of his little carving tools. I don't know how she snuck that in, but it was little carving tools for him because she didn't know what else to bring. He had so many big tools, but she brought him a couple carving tools. Said, just carve something. You know, use the crates from the potatoes or make something. When these servicemen came back and they were injured and their mothers were bereft with their injuries, or worse yet, they didn't come back at all. Terumi suggested to Nobuichi, why don't you make them something? Make them a chair to sit on outside. Make them a bench they could, enjoy. Make them something. We have to do something. They had nothing. And he did. And he started asking that he needed to make these things to commemorate these decorated soldiers and the fallen soldiers and their families. And that brought Nobuichi back. And he started telling a few jokes again and started to laugh, but it took him months. And despite this sad loneliness, there were a few acts of kindness during this whole situation. For example, Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady, came to visit all the camps. And she was very vocal. She is a she-hero, a she-hero. She said that this was unjust to put a group of people in a camp like this. She also stated that the college students that are in these camps should go back to college, and she rallied for them. So a very small percentage got to go back to college at the end of their camp days. Camp lasted for 5 years. Mrs. Roosevelt also wrote a scathing article in the Times stating that a Japanese American is no more a Japanese than a German or Italian or an Irishman or a Mexican or a Colombian or a Chinese person or a Filipino person is their country. They are all Americans. We all have men fighting for our democracy. Let them go home. Another hero, a female hero, is a wonderful couple. But first, it's Mrs. Fisk and Mr. Fisk. They were music teachers in the public school. They had immigrated here in 1938 from the Oxford School of Music, the prestigious Oxford School of Music. She was one of the first women who graduated from that school, and they were both piano teachers, gifted classical piano teachers, and they were teaching many, many students privately in California. Oddly enough, many of them were of Japanese descent, and they were Americans because they were born here. When she and her husband, Mr. Fisk, found out what had happened, she thought this was not right, and she would go to the camps and tell them that we will still teach you music. Again, abysmal school. There is not even a chalkboard. So she would take little instruments, flutes, recorders, little handheld drums, and take the 10-hour drive and go in and instruct these kindly instruct these children. And there were many children, like I said, 8,000 children. As I mentioned before, my grandmother loved music, and she would kind of listen outside as the children would sing with this wonderful teacher who would teach on the weekends. After doing this for about 8 months, not every European American felt that this was the right thing to do. Even though Mr. and Mrs. Fisk had only been in the country for a couple years, they had already been granted the privilege of being American citizens. They had already been granted the privilege of buying their first home as young 20-year-olds. When they returned from one of their trips to Poston, Arizona, they were stoned by neighbors who didn't think alike. They said, "You're helping the enemy." Unfortunately, Mr. Fisk died, a very young man. Mrs. Fisk continued to go to the camps and continued to teach music to these children and donated a piano to be able for them to continue with their music instruction. She would often tell them, we might look different, all different, but we all love music, and music is universal. It has no color. It owns warmth. Then it comes full circle when after my mother, who was Shoko, the little girl, got married and moved to Santa Barbara area, guess who was the teacher there? The notable teacher was Mrs. Fisk. And I had the great privilege and honor to take piano lessons from her for 10 years. And so it does come full circle. I owe a debt of gratitude to Mrs. Fisk at so many levels. Our next hero is Mr. Ansel Adams. Mr. Ansel Adams is obviously a world-renowned photographer. He is also a social activist. He believes that mankind needs to see what we do to each other, and that humanity needs to be fully exposed and be transparent, much like his pictures. He ended up being invited to take pictures with his friend, Ralph Merritt. He was able to take pictures of what it looked like at these detention centers, these prison camps. And he was told by the federal government, only take pictures of these happy aliens. Don't take any pictures of the barbed wire. Don't take pictures of the armed guards. Make it look like a happy place, because we're protecting them. And luckily, he was friends with one of the War Relocation Authority foremen. And he said, take your obligatory 100 pictures that the government's going to show to the public. And the rest of the time, do what you want. Go look what you need to look at. Talk to anybody you want to talk to. You have carte blanche. We have 4 professional photographers of Japanese American descent that are prisoners here. Talk to them. Ask them what they would take pictures of to record history. And so he did. He took 5,000 pictures, and he had carte blanche for a couple days, and he interviewed people, and he was able to really get the truth. He captured the beauty of the barren desert. I'm not sure if anybody would want to live there, but he captured that beauty. But he also saw the resourcefulness of the parents and the farmers who tried to do shade gardening to help with eating edible flowers and vegetables that would grow in the desert. They developed an irrigation system. Over 5 years, they were able to grow things like potatoes, more of the Japanese variety. They were able to then have Eagle Scout ceremonies because they were not allowed to have any badges, but they were able to reward their children. And he took pictures of kids playing with the biggest toys, marbles. Mr. Ansel Adams also sought out to check to see the truth. So he also, again, came to the, sought out the professional photographers. And he did take pictures of the barbed wire. And he did take pictures of the armed guards and significantly painted the picture. He showed pictures of fallen soldiers and bereft family members when they didn't return. The soldiers did not return from the 442nd. He showed children yearning to look outside of the barbed wires. These pictures were not just put in his little memory book. I'll continue with that in a minute. He also put them into the Museum of Modern Art. He also included pictures of not only fallen soldiers, but also the grief-stricken families of those who lost their parents, their nieces and nephews, and their uncles and aunts in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs, and could do nothing to help them. He not only showed these pictures at the Museum of Modern Art and told the stories. He interviewed children, to parents, to grandparents, to great-grandparents, and how they felt about this, and politely put that they didn't understand why they were put in a prison camp. There was not a single conviction of the 120,000 put in these camps. Ansel Adams Museum display was shut down in 3 days by the federal government. He did not make friends. They called him a communist. They called him all kinds of things I can't repeat right now. But anyway, it wasn't nice. So he decided he'd write a book. So he already had the book in print. And he put the book together called Born Free and Equal, the story of loyal Japanese Americans. And he published it. And he had copies in all the libraries. And the federal government came and burnt those books. Just like that. Said, no, you can't do that. So Ansel Adams tried his best, and those books are still in print. So one of the pictures that is really poignant is this is more of a picture in the modern day, but each one of these members of my grandmother's family, and she's the beautiful lady that's in the front, putting her arms around that young boy. Every person in this picture lost a family member or has a family member that's very sick from the Hiroshima atomic bomb. This is when she went to visit them again later in life. And the impact is still continuing because many of those people have cancer. She wanted to be able to help them, but she couldn't because she was put into a prison camp. However, she was always stalwart. And as I said before, she didn't cry through her twin sons passing away. She didn't cry that her husband was taken away. When she found out that her family members had passed away, or she had no idea, she cried herself to sleep that night. She found out the atomic bomb was released. And again, with all this happening, there are no convictions of any mistreatment of the prisoners in this camp. And they chalk it up to war hysteria. So the war comes to an end. And the interesting thing about that is that they said, okay, goodbye. You can go home. Well, they didn't have a home. There were no homes, no jobs. They ended up going to a Methodist church and lived in the basement on a cot. Out of the generosity of this church, they were able to stay there. They needed to find a job and employment. Flash forward. In order to buy a home in America, and if you were an immigrant from Japan, you had to have a child that was 21 years of age. So in 1950, when Shoko, daughter, turned 21, again, as I mentioned, they had children late in life so they could start the business. They paid in cash that home. And the banks could not deny them. The bank did not freeze their accounts because she had the cash in a stowed away place. I believe it was somewhere inside her sewing machine. And she took that cash, paid for that house with her husband, Nobuichi, and they had the home of their dreams. However, in 1952, the McCarran-Walter Act was passed, giving immigrants from Japan the full right to become naturalized citizens. Well, they beat them to the punch. They bought the house 2 years prior. But unlike their European immigrants who could buy a home within 3 to 5 months, like Mr. and Mrs. Fisk. But they had their dream house, and they had their daughter, and the daughter did go to college. To make a long story short, that daughter had 5 children. I'm the oldest of 5. All of us went to college. We all received advanced degrees. Our children are going to college. My children are also my IT department for this nice talk. I'm so grateful. And I think her American dream was of that. Terumi would make this chirashi sushi. Chirashi sushi is like a 7-layer dip of sashimi, of fresh vegetables, of sushi flavored rice with vinegar, fresh lemons, fresh carrots, cucumber, avocado. It is happiness in a bowl, bursting with flavor, bursting with color. She would try to sell these or even give it to them as gifts to her European American clients. And they said, oh, I don't want to try that. And she would chop up the sashimi so they wouldn't recognize it. They began to really enjoy this kind of different food. Everything was familiar, but it was just served a little differently, just like the American dream. We are all Americans, and we have our different poke bowls. So in her time frame, you wonder, what does an American child look like? Well, I'm just going to do quickly the run through of all the things that what she went through in her life. In 1952, like I mentioned, they were able to become American citizens. In 1988, the Civil Liberties Act was passed, in which all the people who were put in camps were given $20,000. It said, so sorry, we made a mistake. No convictions of any wrongdoing, no espionage. Yet we will put you in a federal prison and interrogate you for about 9 months.
Wow.
Thank you. And that money was given to my grandparents, Nobuichi and Terumi, very early because they were really old by that time. And so they gave their money to the Japanese American National Museum, which is in the heart of Los Angeles. Parking is really reasonable because they were able to donate $10 million from that to show history, how it's written. I could see a show of hands who've been told this story about Japanese Americans being interned at a camp. They do not seem to teach it in certain parts of the United States, but it is a very important part of history that we protect our democracy. In February of this year, there was an official apology from the state of California for them placing all those camps in the state of California. The apology is nice, but let's not let history repeat itself. As far as the apologies are concerned, there was not just 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 presidents apologized for what happened to the Japanese Americans. during camp. On September 16th, 1996, please listen to this song. September 16th, 1996, my grandmother, Terumi Takatsugi, passed away. She saw so much history. She saw the beauty in coming to a new country and being excited as a 19-year-old. She had a wonderful husband and a wonderful life. I think that sharing the knowledge of our past American history is vital, especially at this time. The arigatai is our gratitude, eternal gratitude for the roots that we've developed and the roots from our ancestry. And we all have a story. And to quote the tennis player Naomi Osaka, was just quoted recently, and she said, when she won the US Open, she said, I would like to thank my ancestors. My mother's from Japan, my father's from Haiti, because every time I remember that their blood runs to my veins, I am reminded that I can only win. I would like to leave you with that, and I'm so grateful I got to share this story with you. I hope I honored my grandmother. I hope I honored all of your grandmothers. I am so grateful to be an American, and thank you for listening. Thank you. And now we're going to have dinner. Any questions?
Raise your hand.
Can I eat?
Come over. Doesn't it look good?
Joy, my only question is, are you going to make that food for us the next time you got your women's tennis?
Hey, Coach Steve. Yeah, doesn't that look good? Of course I will.
It looks absolutely delicious, and I think myself and the team would love to try that someday.
Oh, it is so good. It's Japanese 7-layer dip with sashimi. It's so good. Come on over.
Hi, Joy.
Hi, how are you?
Joy, this is Lucia Rilling. How are you?
Oh, hi. Good.
Hi. I'm
Thank you.
sorry, I just walked in. It's been a late night for me, but Harry had it on, and I said, move over. It's my turn to hear it. I got the last part of it. Thank you for sharing. Your stories are always well written, well choreographed, if I will, and full of good history, and I thank you, and I think we all thank you for that. Yes.
Thank you so much for being such a captive audience. I'm so grateful for my heritage.
You should be.
Resilience that I've learned.
Yeah, absolutely.
From our forefathers, right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.